It's like the due diligence fee buys you the due diligence period. And then as soon as the clock runs out on the due diligence period, now your earnest money is gone. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Real Estate Show. I'm Tiffany Weber. I'm a real estate attorney at Thomas & Weber. We have 3 locations, one in Mooresville, another in Huntersville, and in Denver, North Carolina. And today I have a super special guest, soon to be recurring guest on the show. We have Layla Rogers. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Me too. I'm so happy you're here. So for those of you watching, Layla is a new attorney to our office, not a new attorney. But new to us, and we are just so thrilled to have you. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So drawing on your experience as a real estate attorney, and having seen some things outside of this office, I would love to pick your brain today about a list of things that, like, what are the things that we wish real estate agents would tell their clients before they went under contract? So we kind of put our heads together and came up with a list. So the first on our list, restrictions.
Yes.
Tell me your thoughts on restrictions before going under contract.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I can't really think of anything more important than making sure that the property that you're going to purchase can be used for the use in which you intend. So if you're looking to have a rental property, making sure that there aren't any restrictions against rentals.
Which is a hot topic.
Exactly. And also, I mean, if you're planning to run a business out of your home, making sure there aren't any commercial restrictions, just to name a couple.
Yeah. We had a situation a couple of years ago. It's oddly specific, so I'll sanitize it a little bit. But it was a client who wanted to run a business out of their home, like a food service business. And, you know, it's one thing if you're baking cookies and you're selling them every once in a while. But this was a commercial enterprise. So they wanted the builder to put in like a commercial kitchen into their home. And it's something that came out like way later in the process after they were already under contract and they're trying to do change orders and stuff. And the builder was like, hey, I'm not really sure if you can do this. And they're like, oh, well, we want to live here and we're always going to have our business out of our home. Like, we don't know for sure that you can do this. And looking at the restrictions, what they were trying to do, not allowed. So it was, thankfully the builder was able to get the house sold and it worked out amicably. Buyer moved on to a different property where they could do what they wanted to do, but not that one. Hard no. And then, of course, we've seen the ones where someone wants to buy a rental house and finds out afterwards, not this neighborhood.
Right. Absolutely. Or, you know, if you're planning on renovating, you know, potentially turning a single family home into a duplex, for example, and then finding out that there are restrictions in the community that wouldn't allow for that. So, you know, anytime if there's anything just a little unusual or specific that a buyer wants to do with a property, really narrowing those down and checking restrictions and making sure, you know, before going under contract.
Yeah. I mean, step 1, ask your client, what are you going to do with this property? You're going to live in it. Great. Anything else? Is there anything else you're going to do while you live there? Tell me about your pets now or desired in the future. You know, like the exotic animals, you know, some of those could be restricted against. Ben Thomas, whom I wish you could have met, used to ask people in closings, like, do you have any exotic pets that you're moving into the house or that you want to buy soon? Because you probably are not going to be allowed to have those. You cannot have a tiger at this property. I hope you know. Yeah. And then the other thing about restrictions before we move on is that they're findable before you go under contract. I think it's often some agents, especially if they're newer, or maybe not brand new because they're just fresh out of school and they're like, I know how to find all this stuff, but been in the game a little bit, they've forgotten how to search for restrictions or don't know who to ask, and just say, oh, you'll get those once we get the attorney, like once the attorney gets involved. At that point, you've lost some due diligence if you find out something bad from those restrictions. So just know they're findable. And don't be afraid to ask your friendly local real estate attorney for help if needed, or just go straight to the HOA. They got to give them to you, right? So the next thing we had on our list, improvements. Talk to me about improvements.
Oh, now that's another big one. So you find the house of your dreams, but it doesn't have a pool. So you assume, well, it seems like a pretty big lot. We could fit a pool back there.
Yeah.
But it's so important to address that up front. You never know what can happen when you're trying to get those permits. You can go to the local county or town government and find out that you don't have enough impervious land in order to build a pool. And that can really change the whole transaction.
Yeah.
So in order to protect against that, if you say upfront, this is really important to me for this property, you can actually put an addendum to the contract, a contingency indicating that that it would be contingent on those pool approvals coming through.
Yeah, that's so underutilized, I think. And or maybe taken for granted. That example, my house we have a big lot, but the location of our septic is such that we can have a pool, but it's not what you would think looking at the lot. This is not like some massive pool we can put in our backyard just because of the location of the septic. Like, it confines us to a very small area, not even in the most desirable location. Thankfully, that's not something that matters to us a whole lot. But because of the size of the lot, the listing agent was like, someone's going to want a pool here. We need to do some stuff up front to show we have already gone through the process and we know where it could be put. We haven't gone to Iredell County, but we know at least where it could be located. So, I mean, I think even on the listing side, you may want to do some of that preparation ahead of time. If you're in one of those neighborhoods or you have a lot size that could be accommodating, do a little bit of the legwork and make it more attractive. Like, we're down the road a little bit. Now, next we were talking about this can be such a heartbreaker. Due diligence and earnest money, and helping people understand when they are non-refundable. At what point? Because both of those deposits are either immediately non-refundable or they become non-refundable. Talk me through the timing of those deposits, when you make them, and when, if ever, can you get those deposits back?
Well, due diligence is non-refundable. You pay that upfront. And sometimes that can be a little confusing because within the contract, we have what's called the due diligence period. But the due diligence period is a timeline for when you can get your earnest money returned. So that can be confusing.
Yeah. It's like the due diligence fee buys you the due diligence period. And then as soon as the clock runs out on the due diligence period, now your earnest money is gone. So I think another thing in North Carolina is we're one of the few states that has this concept of the due diligence fee. So there was, I remember a couple years ago, there was this kind of like viral video going around of a well-known investor who kind of blew up on TikTok. And he was trying to negotiate for the purchase of a property in North Carolina. And the agent was saying, I don't represent you. I can't tell you what, if anything, to offer as far as a due diligence fee. But I can tell you that the seller is expecting something. Like, we'll look at any offer, but they're probably not inclined to accept an offer that's offering no due diligence fee. And the guy was like, this is a scam. The due diligence fee is a scam. So a lot of people agreeing in the comments, and it opened my eyes to the fact that it's just not the standard thing in the US. What do you think about a buyer who's just desperate to buy a property and offers an insane due diligence fee? What are the risks there?
Well, again, it's non-refundable and it is risky. Absolutely. Of course you do get a credit for it on your closing statement. So, but a bigger earnest money deposit gives you more time to do the proper investigating that you want to do, to get the survey, to get the inspection. So, a bigger earnest money deposit is a safer bet than, say, a very large due diligence deposit.
Yeah, I agree with that. If you've got a pool of money that you're willing to put forth in deposits, maybe weight it more heavily on the earnest money side of things, and also give enough time to perform the due diligence. The North Carolina standard offer to purchase allows the buyer to continue conducting due diligence activities until closing, but after you hit that timeline, the due diligence period, you're still going to lose your earnest money. So if you find something after that point, and if you give yourself 5 days, for a due diligence period, you're not going to get everything done in that time frame. Not with the current landscape of how, how service providers are booked out so long. So I think it's really important to remember you might be desperate or might be really wanting a particular home, but you don't know what you're going to find. Like, give yourself a little bit of a cushion in there. There's something you mentioned when we were talking about our list of things that we would want to tell. This one didn't come to mind for me, but as soon as you said it, I'm like, that's brilliant. That's why we're so glad you're here. The difference in a pre-qualification and a pre-approval and what that means to a transaction happening or not.
Right. Well, and let me say first that every lender is different. But traditionally, you can get what's called a pre-qualification. And so basically, you have reported to your lender, this is what I make. These are my assets. But you perhaps haven't given all the supporting documentation yet, like pay stubs, tax returns, all that type of thing. So once you take it to that second level and then get the qualification, then you're kind of in a more secure position. Sure. Because I have seen some closings get very delayed because, for example, tax returns haven't been provided. Right. And, the lender then took a closer look and said, hold on, what's going on? So really just having all your ducks in a row with your lender before you go under contract, just to be sure. I always say, take that extra step, get as far with them as you can so that you're feeling secure in your financing.
Yes. And if you're serious about buying a house, you have to do all those steps anyway. So getting it done earlier makes the closing process a little bit less stressful. I know that it's extremely stressful to be in the middle of buying a house, conducting inspections, and also gathering every scrap of paper you've ever signed in your whole life to give to your lender. Do the paperwork stuff first if you can. And there are some lenders, like you mentioned, they're all different, but there are some lenders that will even take you like pre-underwriting. I don't know enough about underwriting as a lender to talk extremely intelligently about that, but I know that some offer that or say, hey, look, this is like the strongest you can make. Like, it doesn't get any stronger of an offer than this if you've gone this extra layer. But yeah, it's like what the qualification is basically the lender saying, if everything you told us is true, which we don't know yet, but if you're telling the truth, this is what we can do. And then the pre-approval is what you've told us is true, and this is what we can do.
Right. And then, of course, there's that next step of making sure that there aren't any major changes. So always stressing not to make any major purchases, not to open any other lines of credit, not even a credit inquiry. Yeah. Because everything that you do that kind of disrupts your financial situation, there'll just be additional paperwork and questions.
Right. Yeah, it's all being scrutinized. That makes me think of like the changes. Being careful to not have crazy changes during the pendency of your loan application. I had an assistant that worked here. When she started, she was like, hey, just so you know, in a couple weeks, I'm going to need a half day to close on my new house. What? I mean, the half day is fine. Take as much time as you need. You're going to need more time to move. That's not the issue. What do you mean you just changed jobs and you're buying a new house? I'm a real estate attorney. Like, talk to me. If you were buying a new house, we could have worked this out in such a way that you're not going to have to do all of this extra paperwork because you're in the middle of changing jobs and buying a house. I was just shout out Allison if you're ever watching this. Love you. But I was like, come on, man. Now the next thing on our list, contingencies, and I like this one. Because there used to be in North Carolina a built-in, like a section of the contract that could make the contract contingent upon the sale of another home. Now you can report whether you have another home to sell, but that doesn't create a contingency. And Layla, talk me through why that's important.
Oh, sure. This is a big one. If you are relying on the proceeds from your current residence for your purchase of your new residence, I absolutely would recommend that you have an addendum drafted to the contract indicating as such, because otherwise you don't have a contingency. And then if that sale of your residence doesn't, falls through, then you would be in breach of the contract. So with that contingency agreement, it's not part of the standard form North Carolina contract. It is something that a closing attorney would have to draft, and definitely something to have in place that's really important. So even if you're getting an extended close date, say 60 days or so, I mean, there's still no guarantee. Don't rely on that extra time. Just get that addendum drafted as a formal contingency agreement.
Yeah, and it's another reminder to carefully read the offer to purchase that you're signing, because at least in the North Carolina standard offer to purchase, there's like a big box that says checking this box does not create any sort of contingency. If you're unable to sell your home, that doesn't mean this contract is terminated. It doesn't mean you're getting any of your money back. Keep all of that in mind. And so some buyers will, well, why is it even in there if it doesn't give me any protection, so to speak? Well, part of it is giving the seller information to evaluate your offer. And if a seller is like, okay, they have a house to sell, we don't know for sure, like you said, anything could happen. This might not close. So if they're offering me $0 in due diligence and $100 in earnest money, and I don't know if they're going to close, maybe that's not an offer I'm going to take. Or maybe I'm going to negotiate up those deposits for my time off market in case they are, what if that deal falls apart. And another thing on the contingencies is also when you're reporting whether or not you're getting a loan. There's another one of those. Anytime you see a box in the contract, like maybe you ought to look at that carefully. Explaining that this contract's not contingent on you actually getting approved for that loan. Your financing is not a contingency of this contract. So yet another reason why take the time to do the extra step with your lender ahead of time.
Absolutely.
That brings us to, we have a bonus tip. We were going to say 5 things, but we do have an extra. And that's because Layla was just like bringing the heat today with your list. You brought up back-to-back closings. And I think even back-to-back is a really good example, but you brought up setting expectations with your client. So tell me what you meant by that.
Sure. So we were talking about contingencies, selling your residence before you purchase your new one. And a lot of times this can happen on the same day. So if you are selling your home at 9 a.m. and you need those proceeds for your closing at 10 a.m., just setting expectations, because things can happen. Things can happen with lenders. They can happen with final walkthroughs with your agents. Maybe some repairs haven't been completed. So really anything can happen. I mean, and we all in a perfect world hope that, the chain reaction down the line of closings is going to go smoothly. But, just everybody keeping in the back of their mind, if they're scheduling movers and prepaying movers to be there at a certain time, just realizing that, life happens, things happen, and there are just countless different hiccups that could occur.
I know that you've heard this too, of agents saying, well, don't worry, they're going to e-record it anyways. How agents maybe get in their head that e-recording is instantaneous, and it's not. It's a line, just like if you walked into the courthouse or into the clerk of court. Why do I keep saying clerk of court? The register of deeds. Right. My goodness. Just as if you were walking into the register of deeds and standing in line, it's just an electronic line. And one thing that we do a mix here. We'll e-record some things. We'll take things, like right here in Mooresville, there's a recording office close by. There are times where we can get the title update and the recording done more quickly than if we'd submitted it in the queue. And one of the benefits of that is, like, let's say there's something off, like margins are off, or, something was slightly off in the notary and it's going to get rejected. Well, you've got a courier standing there who can maybe make an adjustment and get it immediately corrected. Whereas in the line, if it gets rejected, you get out of line and have to start all over again. So that's a little bit of a tangent. But what do you think about when it comes to back-to-back closings? It's an important right of the consumer to be able to choose their attorney. But I think if it works out that you can do those closings in the same attorney's office, there are some efficiency gains to be had, in that there's no money to have to move to another account.
Right. That's tremendously helpful. Yeah. I mean, the longest delays that I've seen in back-to-back closings are associated with wire transfers going in between offices.
Yeah. I was signing with some sellers earlier today who are purchasing elsewhere tomorrow. I don't know if it's a different state or what, but they're buying somewhere else tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. And our buyer is a mail away, so we'll get those documents hopefully first thing in the morning from FedEx. But they're like, does that mean our funds won't be there at 11 a.m.? Like, it absolutely means your funds won't be there at 11 a.m. You know, that's if FedEx is precisely on time. You know, and you also have to consider, was the buyer's money here already? Thankfully, buyer and lender money is already here, so we're ahead of the game. But you cannot count on the funds sitting by the time you sit down at the closing table at 11 a.m. tomorrow. Your closing attorney is not going to have those funds. So just understand, you're not going to record at 11:37 and plan accordingly.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's I think you make a good point in general about just setting expectations with clients about how long does the process really take? What is reasonable to expect as far as, you could even go back to negotiating repairs. What is the seller obligated to do? What are they not obligated to do? Just level set with your clients, and it makes, on buyer and seller side, kind of smooths it out for everybody. Any final words on this? Anything you wanted to say about any of these points that we didn't get to?
No, I think this is all really valuable information, and just happy to be here today.
Yeah, I'm so happy too. Okay, well, in that case, that wraps up our first episode with Layla. I have a hot tip. She will be back. So just stay tuned. We're going to have other episodes with her coming out very soon. But thanks for watching this episode of The Real Estate Show.